King is the perfect example of breadth versus depth of knowledge. And apart from the great licks, we can all learn a ton from his approach to music. Now, to explain this, I need to take a slight detour, but I promise this conversation will change the way you think about the guitar. So when it comes to learning any skill, there's two main approaches. We can go for breadth of knowledge or depth of knowledge. Breadth is learning a lot of information, and it's the trap we all fall into as young, eager guitar players. We try to learn 100 licks from 100 different guitar players, 20 genres of music, every single technique. You get the point. Breadth is learning a lot of different things. By contrast, depth is learning something very deeply. So instead of learning 100 chords, you might just learn one C major triad everywhere in the neck and every inversion. At that point, you can say, my knowledge of C major is deep. Now, of course, the ultimate goal would be to learn everything very deeply. And when you do that, you become Tommy Emmanuel, Guthrie Govan, or Julian Lage. But if we're being a bit more realistic, we all have limited time on the planet Earth, which means we have limited time to play and practice guitar. So starting with the idea of depth before breadth is a very efficient and useful way to approach the guitar. By the way, this is Rediscovering B.B. King, a series where we're exploring B.B. King's gear and playing, and a big thank you to Sweetwater for sponsoring this series. So within B.B. King's depth of knowledge, there were two main focuses: his micro licks and motif development. So after analyzing hours and pages of B.B. King solos, I narrowed everything down to about 10 or so micro licks. Now I call these micro licks because usually when we think of a lick, we imagine a complete idea like this, or like this. But B.B. King's playing wasn't really centered around full licks. Instead, he took even smaller chunks of info and mixed them together in different ways at different tempos. So I'll give you an example of these micro licks. This is micro lick 1, and in this case we have a micro lick with 3 variations. Very, very simple. We're in the key of C, and we're just going to the root note. So that's one variation. The other variation is just to play the root note C. And the other variation you probably heard, of course, is that high note that B.B. King often plays. So that's micro lick 1, and there are 3 different variations. And then for a different micro lick, we have some of B.B. King's bends. So we have this bend. So it's a whole step bend. We can also do a half step bend right there. Or we can go 1 fret up and do a half step bend as well. That's another micro lick with 3 variations. And our final micro lick that we'll look at right now is just one idea, no variations, and it's this. So we're just going from the root note to the second and hammering on, and then playing the 6th right above it. And of course, all of these notes are coming right from the BB box. So basically we have those 3 licks and we can do so much just from that. I want you to understand that the point is not that you memorize all these ideas in some type of dictionary, encyclopedia, and you go, okay, micro lick 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 7 plus 8. That's not the point of this. The point is that since I organized them for you, you have an easy way to practice them, and then they just become part of your body. So for example, so again, just a handful of micro licks were used there, and we can already start to see how B.B. King makes these licks by combining the micro licks. And then of course, since there's only a handful of these ideas, it's very easy to practice them, it's very easy to manipulate them and fit them into different contexts. Now this was really genius, and here's why. If you know 2 licks, you can play those 2 licks a few different ways. Or like this. But if you take 3 micro licks, you can combine them much easier and get a lot more from them. This is depth. And speaking of depth, My BB King course goes deep into this topic. We focus on developing beautiful bends and vibrato. We get into using his micro licks at fast tempos, slow tempos, and even rhythmic soloing over the minor blues. And we even look at solos from Kirk Fletcher, who is the modern guitar player that, in my opinion, pushed the BB King style even further. And of course, when you purchase the BB King course, you get the rest of my one guitar course package, which has all of my other lessons on blues, jazz, modes, chord vocabulary, purport navigation, and so on. And this is all for one price, no subscriptions. It's all linked below if you're interested. Okay, so we have the micro licks. The next step is to understand how BB King actually made music with the licks. And for that, we turn to Solocraft, which you just saw a little bit of in the intro of the video. Now, there are entire books on developing melodies, but in the spirit of BB King's simplified approach, I also simplified my point of analysis to just 3 topics, and I'm calling them calls, statements, and motifs. The basic idea is calls and statements, not to be confused with calls and response, but anyway, calls and statements are both types of phrases we use to create flow in our solos. And the final layer is motifs and motivic development. Motifs are just repeated ideas we use throughout our solos to create cohesion. So phrases give us structure and motifs give us cohesion and tie everything together. And of course, I came up with different rules for each type of phrase, different types of notes they use, different ways to develop motifs and so on, and that's all in the course as well. So even if you're not interested in playing the blues or playing like BB King, I hope you were able to take something away from at least the philosophy of those first 3 lessons, because they can apply to basically all of music. And for the 4th and final lesson, I'm going to be explaining to you how and why the BB box works. It's basically the most efficient way to combine major and minor pentatonic scales. And this lesson is from the BB King course link below. So we're jumping right into the BB box and what makes it special. And a quick disclaimer, this is not the area of this whole thing where I go into a lot of detail about how the blues works, how to use chords, how to use pentatonic scales, and all of that information. If you need that basic preliminary information, check out the basic Solocraft course first, and then come back to the BB King section that we're doing right now. So we're going to be talking about the blues, and we're going to use a C blues as our quick example here. So of course, a C blues, or really any blues, has 3 chords. And for our C blues, the first chord is going to be C dominant 7. Our second chord, which is the 4 chord, is going to be F dominant 7. And our 5 chord is going to be G dominant 7. Now, what this means for us is that when we're playing our different blues solos, we would like to be able to target every note from that dominant chord. And although every note is important, the most important note for us to be able to target is the major third of each of those 3 chords. And we can also target the 7th as an important note, that flat 7, which makes it a dominant chord. But really the most important note, remember this, the most important note is the 3rd of every chord. That's going to give us the distinct nature of that particular chord in this case. Now, the first scale we often think about when playing the blues is the blues scale, which is basically the minor pentatonic scale with 1 added note. So we have C, E flat, F. The added note is this F sharp or G flat right here. This is the blue note. Then G, B flat, back to C. Now, the reason we often gravitate to the minor pentatonic scale or the minor blues scale for playing the blues is that we have the ability to target a lot of important notes for each chord. That being said, you're going to see that we are not able to target every note that we would like to target. And what do I mean by that? Well, you'll remember that I just said when playing over every chord, we want to be able to target every chord tone, meaning the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the flat 7 if possible. And I mentioned that the most important note to target is the major 3rd for these different chords. Over our 1 chord, you'll see with our pentatonic scale and our blues scale, we can target the C note, which is great, and we can target the G note, which is great, and also the B flat, our dominant, our flat 7. But you'll see that in our minor pentatonic scale, there is no E natural. We need this note right here. for our 1 chord, but we don't have that in the minor pentatonic scale. Okay, let's continue. We go to our 4 chord, we have our root note F, we have our 5th C, and we even have our flat 7, E flat. But you're going to notice here as well, we don't have the 3rd, which is our A note. So for example, we would love to have this note. Because then it's very clearly our 4 chord. So we don't have the 3rd from our 1 chord, and we don't have the 3rd from our 4 chord. When we go to our 5 chord, as you can imagine, we have a similar issue. We can play the root note, which is fantastic, our G, and we can play our F, which is our flat 7, because that's found in the minor blues scale. But we don't have our 5th, which is D, and we also don't have our B, which is the 3rd of our 5 chord. So we would like to have this note. For our 5 chord, but we don't have it. So although the minor pentatonic scale and the minor blues scale is a really beautiful scale, we don't have the most important note for any of our 3 chords, and that is the 3rd. So what guitar players figured out is that we can now just mix the minor pentatonic scale or the minor blues scale with the major pentatonic scale. When we add in the major pentatonic scale notes, we now have the E, which is the 3rd for our 1 chord. We now get an A, which is the 3rd for our 4 chord. And the final note we get is the 5th of our 5 chord, which is D. Now, even when we mix the major and minor pentatonic scale, we still are missing one note. That is the B, which is the 3rd for our 5 chord. We still don't get that note, but at the same time, we get every other note, and we also get that beautiful G flat for our blue note. So a mix of the minor pentatonic scale with the blue note or the blues scale and the major pentatonic scale gives us almost every single note we could ever want to play in the blues. And then we can just add in that B natural over the 5 chord. And if you think about it, the blues is almost exclusively 1 and 4 chords. We only have 1 of the 12 bars for the 5 chord, so it's not a huge deal. Now, if you think back to our topic of breadth versus depth of knowledge, of course, over time, you're going to learn every major and every minor pentatonic scale everywhere on the neck. And over time, you're going to learn how to navigate it completely, perfectly, of course. But if you just think about it very, very quickly, you'll quickly see that if we were combined just one position of the scale, we have to now learn all of this information. And that is a reasonable amount of information to learn, but it is also a lot to take in all at one time. And that's where the beauty of the BB box comes in. Now, here's the thing. I don't know what other guitar teachers are teaching in terms of how the BB box works or how many notes are part of it. I just know what BB King played because I studied now so many hours of his playing that I'm confident in showing you, obviously, like what he does. So I'm going to show you what I consider to be the BB box based on what BB King actually played, as you'll see later in this course. So I like to visualize it from the root note of the blues, in this case is going to be C, on the B string, which is right here. So we often think about things from our minor pentatonic scale, which would be right here. If we just go over to the next root note of C on the B string, we now have kind of where we are in that blues BB. We now are in our BB box. And I like to visualize it from my first finger on that C note. And of course, this is what BB King often did. So what are the notes that we have? Well, we have our A note on a G string right here. We have C. We have D. And now from here, we have E flat. And we can get to that E flat by just playing the note, or we can bend from our D. From that D note, in addition to bending to the E flat, we can also bend to the E. And we can also bend to the F, which is a minor third up. So far we have this. Or so built into the BB box is a beautiful way to get to the notes because we're bending from that second degree, which is a really nice note to play in general. And we're bending to other important notes like the flat 3, the major third, or the fourth, which as you know is the root note for our 4 chord. So really, really beautiful right there already. As we continue to the high E string, we then have E, we have F, and we have G. And then we can also bend the specific notes. So for example, we can bend from this F to the G flat, which is our blue note, which BB King often did in his playing. So we can bend to that blue note, which is the same as this one that we are used to playing, of course. Great. When we're on our G, we can bend up to A. And we can also bend up to B flat, which is a minor third. And so as you can see, we now have just a limited amount of information. We have just these notes, or really on just 3 strings. And from there, we have a few notes we can bend to. And when we combine all of that, we have the same important notes for mixing major and minor pentatonic scales along with the blue note. So BB King essentially became a really amazing master of using just that information, just that area of the neck, to play over the blues in a very musical and really inspiring way. So for the most part in this course, we're going to focus on that area, the BB box. We're going to focus a little bit in box 1 of the pentatonic scale because BB King used that as well. And we're also going to focus on box 2 of the pentatonic scale, especially when talking about the minor blues later. And our goal is to get very deep. We're trying to get depth with this limited amount of information.